The lynx first appeared on the frozen lake at dawn, standing so still in the blue morning light that several villagers mistook it for a stump of dark wood or a broken fishing marker half buried in snow. Then it moved. A long, silent step, a turn of the head, a flash of tufted ears against the pale sky, and everyone on the shore of Lake Velen went quiet. The village of Harrow's End sat at the northern edge of the lake, where winter came early and left late. By mid-January, Velen was a world of white glass and drifting snow, its surface frozen hard enough for sleds, net fishermen, and the cautious crossing of villagers who had grown up reading ice the way city people read traffic lights. Children were warned never to wander far from the marked routes. Men checked the depth with poles. Women stood at cottage windows with shawls around their shoulders and always knew by the pace of the wind when the lake was safe and when it was only pretending. A lynx on the ice was not something anyone remembered seeing before. "Lord help us," old Marta Ivers whispered, squinting from beside the bakery porch. "What is it doing out there?" No one answered. The animal stood almost at the center of the lake, though not quite, a little east of the old fishing lanes, near the pressure ridge where the ice sometimes rose and cracked in long white seams after heavy wind. It was a large Eurasian lynx, thick-furred and broad-pawed, its coat a winter gray mottled with darker spots. Its tail was short and black-tipped. Its face, framed by thick cheek ruffs, seemed too solemn for a cat and too wild for comfort. It was not walking across the lake, it was staying in one place. At first, the villagers reacted the way villagers often do to unsettling things. They talked, they guessed, they contradicted one another with confidence. It chased a hare out there. No hare would stay on open ice. Maybe it crossed in the night. Maybe it's sick. Maybe it's trapped. But it did not look trapped. It paced in a slow circle, stopped, looked down at the snow, then lifted its head toward the village as if checking whether anyone was watching. Elsa Van, the schoolteacher, watched from the path above the shore, with her gloved hands wrapped around a basket of exercise books she had not yet taken to class. At 31, Elsa had lived in Harrow's End all her life and was practical by nature. She had little patience for superstition, none at all for gossip, and just enough respect for winter to know that when something in the landscape behaved strangely, it was wise to pay attention. By noon, the lynx was gone. By evening, the story had reached every kitchen in the village. Normally, that would have been the end of it. A strange sighting, a few embellished retellings, then the slow burial of wonder under chores and weather. But that evening, as snow began falling again in fine, hard grains, Thomas Arvin did not come home. Thomas was a widower of 38, a quiet man with broad shoulders, rough hands, and a 7-year-old daughter named Lida, who went everywhere with him when school was not in session. He had taken the child out that afternoon in his sled to check the ice nets he kept along the eastern channel beyond the pressure ridge. It was not unusual. He had done it dozens of times before. He knew the lake better than almost anyone still living by it. But by dark, the lamp in his cottage remained unlit. By 8, his neighbor went to check. By 9, the church bell rang twice, the old village signal that help was needed. By 10, half a dozen men were out with lanterns, poles, and rope, searching the marked trail in a storm thick enough to erase boot prints before they had finished being made. They found nothing. Not the sled, not Thomas, not little Lida. Only wind, snow, and the vast white silence of Lake Velen after midnight. By the time morning came, Harrow's End had the brittle, airless stillness that settles over a place holding its breath. Elsa had barely slept. She was at the shore before sunrise, standing among the gathered villagers as the lake slowly took shape again under the gray light. And there it was. The lynx had returned. Same place, same stillness, same small circle of pacing and stopping on the frozen lake beyond the ridge. This time, nobody joked. The mayor, Henrik Solberg, stood with his hat in both hands and stared out so long that frost formed white against his beard. Beside him, Anders Pike, the blacksmith, muttered, "That's where Thomas was headed." Elsa felt the thought strike the crowd all at once. The lynx was standing almost exactly along the route Thomas would have taken to his eastern nets. Marta crossed herself. Someone behind Elsa whispered, "It found them." Another voice, quieter and worse, said, "Or it's feeding on what's left." The ice rescue party formed immediately. 4 men roped themselves together: Anders, Henrik, young Leif Tanner, and Pastor Emil, who had no business going out onto a half-shifting lake in his 60s, except that his heart was too good to remain on shore while another man's child lay missing. They took poles and crept forward over the snow. Half the village watched from land in a silence so deep Elsa could hear the small hiss of drifting ice crystals over the lake surface. The lynx saw them coming. It did not run. Instead, it stood tall, ears forward, and stared. When the men came within perhaps 50 yards, the animal turned sideways and moved several steps, not away entirely, but just beyond a wind-sculpted rise in the snow. Then it stopped again and looked back. "It's moving off," someone said behind Elsa. But Elsa felt a sudden tightening in her chest. "No," she thought, "it's making room." The men reached the spot. From shore, it was hard to see at first what had drawn the animal there. The snow was broken and churned in a rough oval. A dark object lay partly buried beneath drifted powder. Leif dropped to one knee and began brushing away snow with both arms. Anders leaned in. Henrik shouted something no one on shore could hear. Then Pastor Emil removed his hat. A low sound moved through the crowd on land. Not quite a cry, not quite a word. The search party waved frantically toward shore. Alive or dead, they had found something. Elsa did not wait for explanations. She ran for the sledge path where the rescue team was loading blankets and a stretcher. By the time they reached the men on the ice, her lungs burned from cold and fear. What she saw there stayed with her the rest of her life. Thomas Arvin lay half covered by snow beside the broken remains of his sled. One runner had snapped clean off. The cargo frame was overturned, and one side of the small canvas-covered seat compartment had collapsed inward under the storm. Thomas was on his side near the pressure seam, one arm stretched toward the shelter of the tipped sled as though he had been trying to reach it even after his strength failed. Ice glazed the sleeve of his coat. Snow had gathered along his back and shoulder. He was terribly still. And under the broken canvas, wrapped in layers of fur and wool and one of Thomas's heavy coats, was little Lida, alive, barely. Her face was white with cold except for 2 fierce spots of feverish pink on the cheeks. Her eyelashes were frosted. Her lips trembled faintly, though she did not wake. One tiny hand remained clutched in a fold of her father's coat. The entire group went silent. Not the useful silence of work, the stunned silence of people standing in the raw presence of love and its cost. Henrik was the first to speak, voice breaking. "He got her under cover." Anders pointed toward the pressure ridge. "Looks like the sled broke through a crusted seam and tipped. He must have dragged it back up." Elsa knelt beside Lida, careful not to disturb the blankets more than necessary. The warmth bottles were long cold. A thermos lay open near Thomas's body, empty. Beside the girl was a small wooden lunch tin. A piece of hard bread remained inside, wrapped in cloth. Thomas had clearly given her everything he had. Marta, who had insisted on coming in the second rescue sled despite every protest, put a hand over her mouth and turned away, weeping openly. Then Elsa noticed something else. There were tracks everywhere around the snow hollow. Not only the men's fresh boot marks, not only Thomas's broken drag path from the accident, Lynx tracks. They circled the sled, approached the opening, moved away, returned again and again, layered one over another through the snowfall of the night. The animal had not just passed by, it had stayed. A sudden rasping sound made several people turn. The lynx was still there, 30 yards away on the ice, watching. In full morning light, it looked both magnificent and gaunt, heavy-furred but lean through the flank from winter hunger. Snow dusted its back. Its eyes were fixed not on Thomas's body nor on the people, but on the sled where the child lay. No one moved toward it. No one dared. For a long moment, the wildcat and the villagers regarded one another across the cold white lake. Then the lynx gave a short, rough sound deep in its throat, not a growl, not quite, turned and walked away toward the eastern shore. Within seconds, it disappeared behind a swell of snow and was gone. No one spoke until even the tracks seemed to vanish in the glare. Later, when the doctor from the next parish had warmed Lita, rubbed life back into her hands, and pronounced with astonished relief that she would live, the story of what had happened on the lake began to take shape. Thomas had gone out before the storm deepened, likely hoping to return before dark. Somewhere near the pressure ridge, one section of wind-covered snow had concealed a broken rise in the ice. The sled caught, flipped, and threw both him and Lida hard enough to scatter their gear. Thomas must have injured himself badly in the fall, perhaps ribs, perhaps something worse inside, because there were blood flecks frozen on the snow near where he had first landed. But instead of trying to save himself, he had righted part of the sled, dragged its canvas compartment into the shelter of the drift, wrapped Lida in every warm thing he had, and stayed beside her through the storm. He had died within arm's reach of her. The lynx somehow had found them after dark. That was the part the villagers argued over for weeks. Some said the animal had smelled blood. Some said it had heard the child crying after the wind eased. Some said it had only come to scavenge and, for reasons no one could name, had not done what a hungry wild creature might have done. But what none of them could deny were the tracks. The lynx had remained by the overturned sled all through the night and returned again the next morning. It had stood there long enough, visibly enough, stubbornly enough, that the entire village had noticed. And if it had not stayed, if it had wandered off into the woods like any ordinary animal, it was possible Thomas and Lida might not have been found until too late for the child. 3 days later, when Lida was strong enough to sip broth and sit up in bed at Elsa's cottage, because after the death of her father, half the village suddenly and silently became her guardians, Elsa asked her softly what she remembered. The child was still pale. Her voice came slowly, but her eyes were clear. "It was very cold," Lida said. "Papa told me to stay under the coats and not sleep." Elsa nodded and held the mug for her. "He kept talking to me," Lida whispered. "Even after the wind got loud, he told me stories about summer boats. Then he got quiet." Elsa swallowed hard. "And after?" Lida looked toward the window where the late afternoon sun shone weakly over the snow. "I heard something walking outside," she said. "I got scared because I thought it was wolves." "Was it?" The little girl shook her head. "It was the big cat." Elsa felt the room go even stiller. "It looked in," Lida said, making a tiny shape with her hands as if framing the opening of the ruined sled. "Its face was right there. I could see its whiskers." She paused. "It didn't come inside. It just sat down." "For how long?" Lida shrugged in the helpless way children do when time has become larger than they are. "A long time, then it went away. Then it came back when the sky got lighter." She hesitated. "Once I heard birds, but the cat made a scary sound and they went away." Crows, Elsa thought immediately, or foxes. "What did you do?" she asked. "I talked to it," Lida said simply. Something broke open in Elsa's chest at that. "What did you say?" The little girl lowered her eyes to the blanket in her lap. "I told it Papa said I had to stay awake." After Thomas was buried, the whole village standing bareheaded in the bitter cold, the lake shining hard and white beyond the churchyard, Harrow's End changed in small, quiet ways. The eastern ice route was permanently marked more carefully. No child was allowed on Velen without 2 adults and a rope. Mayor Henrik funded a proper rescue sled from parish money, even though he had to argue for it across 3 meetings. And at dusk, more often than before, people looked toward the frozen lake as if expecting to see some gray shape standing far out on the snow. They never saw the lynx there again. But weeks later, old Marta claimed she found its tracks near the edge of the woods behind Thomas's cottage. Anders swore he caught sight of it once at dawn near the deer run above the ridge, healthy and unhurried, vanishing into pine shadow before he could call out. Children began leaving bits of smoked fish at the edge of the forest until their mothers scolded them for foolishness and brought them back inside. Lita never forgot it. Years later, when she was grown and people asked her why she had chosen to become a winter rescue medic rather than leave Harrow's End for a warmer and easier life, she would sometimes smile in that sad, private way of those who carry an old miracle mixed forever with grief. Because once, she would say, something wild stayed with me on the ice until help came. And those who knew the story always fell quiet after that. Because the villagers of Harrow's End had seen many things on Lake Velen over the years: storms, drownings, good catches, hard winters, lights over snow, men lost and found again. But nothing quite like the 3 dawns when a lynx appeared on the frozen lake every morning. And when they finally saw what it was guarding, even the hardest among them could say nothing at all.